You're very welcome. Toshi Fáilte go léir go dtí an teach ágadamh in Ucht. You're very welcome this evening to Academy House and to the Royal Irish Academy for tonight's discourse, which is AI and Genomics, a future of personalised medical care. This is the second of our discourses this year, which will examine artificial intelligence, known as AI, from various perspectives with distinguished speakers who are experts in their various fields. I'm Imelda Marr, I'm the Senior Vice President of the Academy. Officers are also present here this evening, including the Academy Treasurer, Dr. Mary Kelly, and the Academy Secretary, Professor Dan Carey, who's responsible for putting together these discourses for us this year. The Academy Discourses are the oldest and most renowned series of talks in Ireland. And in a country that's well able to talk, that's saying something. The first discourse was presented in 1786. Historically, they were the occasion reserved for the most distinguished academics to first reveal and discuss their work in public. Things have moved on. We now record these discourses and they're available on the Academy's website and YouTube channels. So our audiences, thanks to technology, are much bigger than they once were. Before we begin, and in keeping with the traditions of the Academy, there's some brief Academy business that I just need to mention. The minutes of our last discourse, which was AI and Engineering, Research, Resources and Regulation, took place on the 3rd of October 2024, and the minutes were posted online. Since our members did not inform us of any issues with these minutes, I will take these as approved and ask the President to sign the minute book at the next available opportunity. Just checking there's no last minute objections. Okay, we can keep going. And that's the end of the formal business. And now it gives me real pleasure to welcome our esteemed speaker and our respondent for this evening's discourse. Our speaker is Professor Sarah Cunningham-Burley, who is chair of the Nuffield Council on Bioethics. The Nuffield Council is a leading independent policy and research centre and the foremost bioethics body in the United Kingdom. The most recent publications from the Council include a joint report with the Ada Lovelace Institute on predicting the future of health and an interim report on citizens' jury exploring public views on assisted dying in England, which conveys their vote and recommendations. So very topical in terms of the work they're doing. Professor Cunningham-Burley is Professor of Medical and Family Sociology and co-director of the Wellcome Supported Centre for Biomedicine, Self and Society at the Usher Institute in the University of Edinburgh. This is an interdisciplinary social science and humanities research centre focusing on developments in health-related science and care. Her own research interests span the social and ethical aspects of personalised medicine, health-related AI and data science, and the integration of patient and public perspectives in research and policy. Professor Cunningham-Burley is also a Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh and the Academy of Social Sciences, and a member of the Faculty of Public Health. Our respondent this evening, and there's always a respondent to the discourse, is Gianpiero Cavalleri, who is Professor of Human Genetics and Deputy Director of the Science Foundation Ireland FutureNeuro Research Centre and Director of the Human Genetic Variation Research Group at the Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland. Professor Cavalleri is also Deputy Director of the Royal College of Surgeons Office of Research and Innovation. He was awarded a PhD in human genetics at University College London, and prior to his arrival in Dublin, he worked at the Institute for Genome Science and Policy at Duke University in North Carolina, coming to work in the Royal College of Surgeons in 2008. He's published over 160 articles in leading peer-reviewed international journals, and his research group works at the interface of computational biology, clinical diagnostics, and population genetics. So after those introductions, I'm delighted to introduce Sarah, over to you. Thank you.
So thank you very much for that kind introduction. And it does feel quite amazing to be here with 200 years or more of discourse. And as a humanities and social science scholar, clearly discourse is really what it is all about. So I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. And I'd also like to thank the Academy for this invitation. I'm delighted that Gianpiero is going to be here and will provide a response. We had a little chat, a little discourse before we came down, and we realized that neither of us are experts on AI, so I just want to make that clear. But we are both really interested in different ways in genomics, and we will also talk about the relationship between genomics and developments in AI. So, let's make a start. In the UK, genomic medicine is already transforming the relationship between research and care. It's already transforming the very organisation of healthcare. This influences patient and healthcare provider relationships. And in fact, it influences what it means to be a patient, or what it means to be a patient in waiting, which is really all of us, because all of us might at some point experience ill health and disease. And medicine can increasingly, through genomics and the relationship between genomics and AI, begin to attempt to predict who might get disease. So that really changes the nature of patienthood and the relationship between citizens, publics, and their healthcare systems. But of course, the development of genomic medicine is uneven. It's uneven within jurisdictions and certainly across jurisdictions. And this provides a great learning opportunity, I think, in terms of how best to develop new forms of care in ways that would maximize health benefit for all in a specific population. Because of these developments, and because they are potentially transformative, there's increasing attention paid to the social and ethical issues and its application. The social and ethical issues in relation to genomic science and its application in healthcare settings, though also perhaps in other settings, for example, education. So I'm going to talk today about some of these issues. But first, I want to just say a little bit more about the Nuffield Council on Bioethics that I'm chairing to provide a little bit of context. So the Nuffield Council on Bioethics, you've heard already a little bit about it, works to place ethics at the centre of decisions about biomedicine and health so that we can all benefit. And it does that in the context of the UK, but also more widely through the networks that we're part of. And although it's been in existence for over 30 years and has certain kind of unique characteristics, and I think these are related to being independent and also the way in which we try to use academic research that we might do ourselves, involve others, to actually influence policy. Our inquiries are all multidisciplinary and multi-method, and we have a reputation for bringing together divergent views. I'm sure there'll be divergent views today in this amazing hall, and also to bring our in-depth work on emerging issues up to date with evidence and developing new perspectives and identifying novel ethical issues as appropriate. So as I said, we want to place ethics at the heart of much thinking, and so we focus on the value of ethics and independence in brokering controversial events. And some aspects of genomic medicine are controversial. We want to help policymakers and publics navigate complexity, medicine brings complex ethical issues, it always has. And we work hard to engage publics in these discussions as well. We try to have both conceptual impact and instrumental impact. So the conceptual impact might be how we might enhance understanding of issues and sometimes reframe debates. And I'll use an example of that a little later on in the presentation. And then the instrumental impact will be around developing policy, law, and practice, so to make a difference to how things are organized, governed, and experienced. So this dual focus, I think, is very important if we're thinking about the role of academic work, research, engagement, and policy impact. So the presentation is in 6 parts, each quite short. So first of all, I'm going to make a few introductory remarks around the topic, and then focus on genomics and personalised medicine, summarize some of the social and ethical issues that emerge from genomics and personalised medicine, then move on to focus on some work that looks more specifically at artificial intelligence, genomic medicine, and predictive medicine, the ability to be able to identify who may succumb to disease at some point in the life course, and then see whether there are further social and ethical considerations that we need to layer on top of the ones that we can already identify, because genomics, the genomics field is already quite mature. And also some of those ethical issues pertain to many aspects of medicine. And then I'll just conclude with next steps, and I'll be interested to hear your own views about how we might prepare for genomic medicine in ways that are socially acceptable and ethically robust. As I do this, I'll be drawing on 3 pieces of work. The Nuffield Council's report that has already been referred to on AI and genomic health prediction, and I'll be talking about that in the second part of the work. Some of our work on genomics and health that we're doing in order to try and develop a framework for use across the sector. And then my own research as a medical and family sociologist with a colleague Anne Kerr and our team, which focuses on personalised cancer medicine and the delivery of that. I'm doing that latter emphasis specifically to draw out the personal in personalised medicine, the human side of developing a genomic personalised medicine, recognising the kind of participation and care that is required from patients, their families, healthcare providers, and researchers to develop and deliver personalised medicine. It doesn't just happen, and it isn't just data. It is actually real people in the clinic confronting sickness and health. Now, a few months ago, I had to clear out my office as we were moving to a brand new building, open plan, of course, short on both bookshelves and filing cabinets. I had worked in the old medical school at the University of Edinburgh for 30 years, so this was a major physical and emotional task. But it took me back to a range of influential work that had shaped my own thinking, research, and teaching. And of course, those influences were actually in physical paper form. You can see a couple of them up there, and I'll explain why they are up there in a second. Some of them had been photocopied many times as teaching material, and it really felt like a treasure trove of ideas and knowledge, just like this room does and the wonderful library next door. A little bit scrappier, of course. So I want to draw attention to 2 of these. One, why is preventive medicine exempted from ethical constraints? By Peter Skrabanek, published in 1990 in the Journal of Medical Ethics. And the other, The Last Well Person, by Clifton K. Meador, published in 1994 in the New England Journal of Medicine. So I'm mentioning them to frame our later consideration, particularly of the role of genomic prediction in preventive personalised medicine. We need to take a critical look at the possibilities and limits of such a medical approach to prevention, whether powered by AI or not. Skrabanek's provocation warns that preventive medicine needs to be subject to the same rigorous ethical oversight and evaluations as all other kinds of medical intervention, and distinguishes prevention that's known to be beneficial at both the individual and population level, such as immunisation, from interventions which are merely hopeful without clear evidence of effect across populations. And we need to heed that warning in the context of AI, genomics, and preventive medicine, as I'll go on to discuss later. The ethical issues today are not only ones related to current developments in medical science. And although the pace of developments makes such consideration urgent, some of the ethical issues are long-standing. Meador's provocation in The Last Well Person focuses on the possibility that every well person could be labelled sick, as our methods of measuring the health of a person are developed through a disease-defining system. So we can't really measure the absence of all disease, so no one can really be truly defined as well. This might lead to surveillance with an increasing range of biomedical diagnostics that may create this constant state of disease or unease, and with it the requirement perhaps to actively pursue both medical intervention and lifestyle changes, something again that I'll come back to. So hold on to that. Preventive medicine, we have to consider the ethical considerations there. And what would it be like to be the last well person? So genomics, health and healthcare, the main focus of this evening. By genomics, we mean all the information about our complete set of DNA, whereas genetic information is about individual genes, allowing diagnosis of specific or rare genetic conditions. The NHS in England has set up a genomic medicine service that provides whole genome sequencing as part of clinical care for some, and in order that those data can then contribute to research. And the idea is to harness the power of genomic technology and science to improve the health of the whole population. Genomic information can then be used to predict disease risk, diagnose disease, and guide treatment decisions, treatments tailored to specific genomic profiles. So personalised medicine, of course, can include other factors such as environmental and lifestyle issues, as can genomic prediction as it develops. So personalised medicine then, social scientists would comment that is at the forefront of what is termed a bioeconomy, a new bioeconomy, and visions for the future of healthcare, something we're discussing and interested in today. So it's important to consider this wider political economy of medical research and innovation and healthcare provision. Embedded in this, in the UK particularly, is a vision of future healthcare that maximises the use of data to effect greater precision and therefore cost effectiveness with patient and population benefit. So healthcare, the healthcare of the future, is envisioned as a data-rich one. But it is a promissory discourse, the official discourse, and an underlying value is promoting economic growth. At the same time, hopefully improving health. So economic drivers are just as important as other drivers and other values if we're thinking about developments in healthcare. To understand genomics and personalised medicine, we have to go beyond the hype and over-optimism to investigate how this is playing out, particularly in areas where genomic medicine is most advanced, and then other healthcare systems can learn and perhaps do better. In fact, if we do that well, we can almost do natural experiments comparing one healthcare system to another and the different ways in which they are embracing or rolling out genomic medicine. I have raised here the context of hope, as personalised medicine is a medicine of hope. The hope of living well with disease, kept at bay or prevented, of surviving diseases such as cancer through tailored treatments. Termed the political economy of hope by an anthropologist Good, it describes how personal and collective hope is generated through and reflected in political and economic structures. So it's not just a kind of personal matter, although it is too a personal matter. It embodies socio-cultural values that sustain and intersect with our political economy, or the political economy of biomedicine. And also a process that Clark has termed biomedicalization, the increasingly techno-scientific medicine that intensifies a process of medicalization. That process of medicalization is where many, many more parts of our lives become subject to some kind of medical intervention or surveillance. And that this has the potential to kind of redefine ourselves. Are we well or not? Define our bodies as well as collectives. The third point on the slide, genomics and personalised medicine, and therefore AI in genomics, also relies on patient data, tissue, and other kinds of engagement and participation in research and service uptake. There would be no genomic medicine without a social contract that made allowing the use of your own health and other data acceptable. This means that data is productive of value, and those from whom data are derived excuse me, are entwined in the production of genomics and personalised medicine. This has been characterised by Hood and Friend as 4P medicine. It's quite useful. This medicine is predictive, personalised, preventive, and participatory. The novelty is in the kinds of data and therefore the kinds of labour that is required as experimentation and analytics become ever more embedded in the healthcare and health research nexus. Our own work on personalised cancer genomics added a further double P to these 4 Ps in that framework, which I'll go on to talk about in a moment. Practices of promise, reflecting the political economy of hope and how the promises of P4 medicine play out through patient engagements, involvement, expectations, and hopes, both for themselves and for others. So I'm now going to talk about some of those matters in a little more detail, drawing on this work on personalised cancer medicine. What are these practices of promise in relation to personalised cancer medicine? This is genomic medicine for diagnostics and tailored treatments, still experimental in many cases. This was a joint programme across the universities of Edinburgh and Leeds, funded by Wellcome, and we conducted a 5-year study of patient, carer, practitioner, researcher, manager, policymaker, their experiences of developing and delivering genomic medicine for cancer. This included diagnostic and predictive tests, tests that could influence decisions about chemotherapy, for example, clinical trials of tailored treatments where genomic stratification occurs, and the large-scale research and infrastructure developments that harness patient data for clinical and research use. And we looked at the different ways in which patients are involved in personalised cancer medicine, in the actual making of it, revealing the everyday realities of the participatory component of genomic medicine. And although we weren't actually focusing on the AI aspects, AI will become and is being used to help identify cancer risk, for example, using genomic data. We found that personalised cancer medicine is developing unevenly across a range of tests, treatments, and research initiatives. So, of course, if it's developing unevenly, there's processes of inclusion and exclusion. We found that personalised cancer medicine traverses local and personal quests for care, together with global networks of services, research, and innovation. Molecular information and tailored treatments then involve a real complex array of opportunities and expectations, where access and success are stratified along multiple lines. Patienthoods, different kinds of futures, and different values coalesce into a range of repertoires. These are repertoires of empowered, hopeful patients, prospective economic growth, and valued national assets, the data. So there's a real intertwining at every level of the development of new technologies between the individual patient, the healthcare provider, the researcher, and the whole healthcare system and the research ecosystem. So the future of informed, optimistic, reassured patients living longer with or beyond cancer by virtue of molecular monitoring and tailored treatments is really aligned to a vision of wealth and prosperity and a health service that can leverage data assets to work for the benefit of all. But our study also found numerous stories of disappointments, disengagements, where patients and their relatives do not experience molecular information as empowering or cannot access molecular monitoring, tailored treatments, or inclusion in trials offering experimental therapies. And practitioners, too, have to navigate this complexity, trying desperately to work in the best interests of their patients. And there's also increased ambiguity surrounding the boundaries between research and care. Caring for a patient in the present, thinking about future patients, whether as a clinician or a patient, requires moral reflection as well as organisation. And that moral reflection is something that clinicians do and patients also do. Decisions to join clinical trials that may not be personally beneficial are often motivated by a desire to help others. How are we doing for time, by the way? I don't have a watch, sorry.
You're okay.
Okay.
There's another 15 minutes or so.
Okay. Okay. I'm just going to skip the next two slides, I think, though, which is a little bit of other background. I don't want to run out of time. And I think we want to get to the AI and genomics. So, how might we summarize some of the social and ethical issues in genomics, personalized predictive medicine? And then we'll go on to consider what happens if we bring AI into the frame. So first of all, uncertainty. Jansen et al. In a recent article on the early detection of disease risk factors in BMC Medical Ethics note that the predictive value and reliability of detection methods need to be carefully monitored and balanced against other aspects such as cost effectiveness and the actionability of risk information. So what can you actually do if you're told you're at risk of disease? There is uncertainty in early detection and prediction, something that we'll also note when we consider the role of AI. The science is developing, but data will have selection bias, and more data will not necessarily always lead to better predictive value. Autonomy remains, as it always has in relation to medicine and medical science, key here. And informed consent is one way to reflect the value of autonomy. But genomic medicine and associated research are so complex that informed consent may be very hard to achieve. Autonomy, though, is much more than this. It is also to live life as you want, and there are aspects of personalised medicine and the associated requirement for data that may compromise such autonomy. People may have unrealistic expectations of prediction and expect to feel empowered by its results. This may encourage participation in a way that may compromise autonomy, not coercion, but an expectation of benefits that may not actually be realised. Privacy, of course, is an issue. This may be harder to ensure when an increasing broad range of data are used to develop predictive tools. This may lead to a lack of trust, impacting on willingness to engage in research and care, and then stymieing future developments. Benefits and harms, as always, in any ethical analysis and in any healthcare decision, need to be carefully weighed using both ethical tools and tools of evaluation and getting beyond the promises and the hype. The disclosure of predictive information then isn't a guaranteed benefit. There is potential for harm, including psychological harm, especially with imperfect predictions, and a lack of actions other than suggestions of lifestyle changes. Three other important elements of ethical concerns. One is justice, of which there are many dimensions. At one level, this is about fair distribution of healthcare resources, equitable access to benefits, possibly all the harder with personalised medicine that is tailored to the individual to a greater extent. There are risks of social exclusion, with access perhaps being denied, for example, to insurance, perhaps health services themselves, or jobs. There's a risk that genomic medicine could undermine solidarity-based health systems through emphasising personal responsibility for health and health-seeking behaviour. And this may further disadvantage those who are already disadvantaged and increase inequalities. As I've already noted, medicalisation is also a risk of genomic medicine and AI-powered genomic medicine. We might be entering a period of intensified medicalisation, overdiagnosis, and overtreatment for diseases that might not have occurred anyway. We may be no longer able to well separate health and disease, and it widens opportunities for medicine, both publicly and privately, to operate, and direct-to-consumer testing raises serious concerns in this space. And then lastly, a bit of a sociologist term here, I apologise, responsibilisation. Predictive and preventive medicine and the participation of people in it may lead to a process where responsibilities for health shift from the state to individuals, and they may not have the capacity and the resources to deal well with that. So now AI, genomics and health. So those two letters are up there now. So we've focused up until now on personalised medicine, genomic medicine, which includes personalised diagnostics and treatments, as well as prediction and prevention. And everything that I've talked about so far is relevant if we consider AI and genomics and the future of medicine. Focusing particularly on what's termed AI-powered genomic health prediction is at the vanguard of promised transformation in healthcare in those jurisdictions that are moving forward rapidly with genomics science. It's heralded as bringing greater levels of efficiency, provision, and personalization. These AI genomic health prediction systems are powered by a form of genomic analysis known as polygenic scoring. Gianpiero will be able to explain that much better than me. which accesses the collective impact of multiple individually small genetic variations on the likelihood of a given person developing a particular disease relative to the rest of the population. It's done without AI, but AI is intensifying efforts in this space. In the UK, AI-enhanced genomics is attracting public and private investment on the promise of transforming healthcare. Now, we know we have to be cautious about promises. At an individual level, insight into risk of disease may encourage people to seek treatment sooner when experiencing symptoms, and it may encourage health beneficial changes. But we know that healthcare seeking behavior is very complex, and the addition of having information about one's risk may not massively change one's health-seeking behavior. At a population level, knowing more about disease risk and where and in whom it occurs could help prioritize services, and also those who should be offered services such as screening. It may also help with understanding responses to medication that could lead to more tailored prescribing, fewer adverse drug reactions, or the use of ineffective treatments. But there are financial, ethical, and service level risks that we'll go on to consider. A few technical details might be useful here. So polygenic scoring is probabilistic. It deals with diseases and traits that are associated with multiple factors, including but not limited to multiple genes. And it's also not limited to health. So developing a polygenic score for an individual requires, first of all, a large sample a large population sample with their genomic and other data, data around observable traits such as diseases, analytical techniques to identify associations between the genetic variants and the occurrence of a given trait. An individual's DNA is then compared with the population level associations to create a score for them as individuals. Of course, this all has limitations as well as possibilities. AI-powered genomic health prediction, such as machine learning and deep learning, helps process large amounts of data faster, more accurately, and can help identify patterns more effectively. So AI-powered genomic health prediction can help expand the size of genome-wide association studies, could help address issues of data quality by better identifying errors and better understanding of the complex interactions between genomic and environmental risk factors. So Ada Lovelace, a sister institute to the Nuffield Council on Bioethics, led a project looking at AI and predicting the future of health. And the final report assesses the potential risks and appropriate role of AI-powered genomic health prediction in the UK health system. Its conclusions are relevant to any health system that has or is thinking about embedding AI-powered genomic health prediction into its research and care. Harry Farmer led this work. I think he's in the audience, not sure. So a big thank you to him, and it also might be useful when it comes to questions. Now, I'm not going to summarize the whole report, you'll be pleased to hear, but focus on the key ethical issues that we identified through this work. The work used a wide range of evidence to help us develop our critique, literature reviews, other forms of analysis, a deliberative public engagement, engaging with experts, and a policy development workshop, amongst other things. So it was a long and in-depth piece of work. Now, we've already looked at some of the ethical and social issues tonight in connection with genomic and personalised medicine, and tried to think about these at different levels, the political, economic, the cultural terrain, as well as through the lenses of populations and individuals. So, does AI-powered genomics amplify these concerns that we've already established in relation to medicine in general, genomic medicine, and personalised medicine in particular? So first of all, there's an ethical challenge around the limitations to genomic health prediction, which, as I've said, could lead to overdiagnosis, overtreatment, and the creation of the worried well. While AI-powered genomic health prediction may overcome some of the accuracy problems and may enable better understanding of gene-environment action, it may not overcome many of the limitations and may not turn the dial on this approach to health, which we're still not sure will be worthwhile in terms of enormous benefits to whole populations. More data isn't necessarily better, as I've said, and excluded populations may still be excluded. Risk prediction may lead to over-surveillance, over-diagnosis, and over-treatment, as I've said. There are also dangers of the early adoption of uncertain science and interventions stemming from this. Such interventions may not necessarily have been fully evaluated, or perhaps can't even be fully evaluated, because prediction is something for the future, and you would have to follow for a long time before you got a sense of the outcomes. And there are also wider socio-cultural ramifications that may not be monitored or anticipated. I've had my 5-minute warning, thank you very much. There's an acceleration and deepening of collection and use of health data. There's a danger of increased discrimination and stigmatization. Responsibilization comes back again, and loss of solidarity that I've already mentioned, as well as the disrupting boundaries of health and disease. So coming up towards a conclusion now, this work already also identified newly defined risks, and Harry did a really good job of creating these novel concepts. First of all is dependency. There are challenges of developing and delivering AI-powered genomic health prediction. It requires enormous resource and capacity, and it's more likely that large-scale adoption of AI and genomics will be through public-private collaboration or possibly outsourcing away from a public health system. This and our research and other research has found this is an area where public are also most concerned. Public health system has limited capacity, and the role of private companies may expand. This will create health system dependency on external or private resources in order to move forward with AI-driven healthcare. There's also a possibility of system fragility. AI genomic health prediction might not meet expectations, yet might have already fundamentally changed aspects of delivery of healthcare, and certainly the research-care interface. There may be a much smaller impact on disease prevention than is promised. It may lead to a redirection of resources away from other forms of prevention that we know might be more powerful in preventing disease, since most diseases have a component that are socially caused by social and environmental circumstances. So this may lead to health system fragility, meaning that public health and preventive services and curative and treatment services suffer from a lack of resource. And if private medicine continues to grow and can select on health prediction grounds, then a public system may be left to deal with those at highest risks. Maybe. We suggested that there needs to be improvements as protections to some of these ethical concerns in data protection law, in equalities law to prevent discrimination, and in insurance regulation. We also recommended that rather than take what we term a maximalist approach for mass disease prevention, where everything changes towards that, to take a much more situational and context-specific approach for targeted genomic medicine. That cautious approach gives us time to think about, deal with, and prevent exacerbation of some of the ethical concerns that I've talked about. So proceed cautiously, engage publics and other stakeholders, rigorously analyse benefits and harms, consider the wider impacts on healthcare and relationships, and ensure always that there is engagement and multidisciplinary critique. So I'm just going to skip this. And part of that multidisciplinary critique means engaging with humanities and social science all along the innovation trajectory, not as an afterthought at the point of application, or not right at the beginning to sort things out so things can then proceed, but to be truly embedded all the way through and to involve interaction with the publics for whom all of this research and healthcare delivery should be improving the lives of. So I think that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
So Vice President, Fellows of the Academy, distinguished guests, it's a privilege and an honor to contribute to this discourse on a topic that's very close to my heart, and also in such a wonderful setting. And thank you to Professor Cunningham-Burley for your insightful and thought-provoking lecture. So my job here is just to try and bridge us towards a group discussion. And I'm just going to make a couple of points to help provide context. So our DNA, our genome, contains about 3 billion letters. So 3 billion A's, T's, C's, and G's. And it's now a relatively routine test to be able to sequence all 3 billion bases of your DNA. In fact, if you take out your phones and Google a whole genome sequence from a direct-to-consumer testing company, you'll be offered one for about €300, right? And in a clinical setting, the price is not dramatically different from that, and it's about the same price as an MRI scan today. And many of us have had MRI scans. It's a routine clinical test. If you sequence your DNA and the DNA of the person sitting next to you, you will see you are 99.9% identical at the level of each letter with that person. So there's a very high degree of genetic identity between any two individuals in the human population. But 1.1% of 3 billion is 3 million, so that's a large, relatively large number of letters that are different between you and the person sitting next to you. And really, over the last 40-odd years, the community of human geneticists have been working, first of all, to identify those differences, and secondly, to understand what they mean. And there's, I feel, quite a beautiful way to view DNA and genetic variation as the way the universe is able to understand itself. Those differences between individuals are the source of evolution. It's how we have developed as an organism. It's how we have helped develop a consciousness. It's how we can help the universe understand itself. So I feel that's a beautiful way of viewing genetic variation. But sometimes genetic changes can cause disease, right? So the first disease gene identified was in 1983 for Huntington's disease, the HD gene. And since that point, human geneticists have now identified over 7,000 genes that can cause disease, monogenic disease in the human population. So we have about 20,000 genes, and a third of them, if particular genetic variants are introduced, they will cause monogenic disease. So what do I mean by monogenic disease? It's a disease that's caused by a single gene. It's inherited through a family. So for those of you that did an Irish Leave Insert, you probably would have learned about autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive. That is referring to monogenic familial disease. So we know of 7,000 genes now that can do that. So I feel, as a community of human geneticists, that's a pretty good job. And it's really important to appreciate that that type of a test is now routine in our health services, or relatively routine. So for example, you know, if there is a child who develops a developmental delay or a learning disability, we now know that a significant proportion of such cases are caused by monogenic disease, and there is a test, a genomic test that can be applied to identify that cause. And in a small number of cases, but a growing number, there are now treatments to reverse the impact of that genetic change. The treatment could be a pharmaceutical, and that relates to the bioeconomy that Sarah was talking about, but it could also be something as simple as a change in diet. And I feel, from an Irish perspective, it's important that as a state, we invest in that type of basic genomic test for clinical use. And we may have some clinical geneticists in the audience who can expand on that. The Department of Health and the HSE have published a national strategy for genetics and genomics. They've established a national office within the HSE, and there is now much needed investment to grow that service for basic clinical tests. So this is explaining why someone has a disease. Sarah spoke a lot about predicting who might get disease. So I want you to try and separate those two things in your mind. Why someone has a disease that's probably monogenic and a test to diagnose that versus who might develop disease. So on that latter point, after developing really good techniques to find those genes for monogenic disease, the community of geneticists about 20 years ago started to shift towards, okay, who might develop disease in the future, in particular, the more common complex diseases. Things like, say, common forms of epilepsy, many forms of renal disease, hypertension, diabetes, these conditions that we're very familiar with in the population, diseases of high public health importance. And Sarah also mentioned a particular technique, genome-wide association study. That's the basic tool that geneticists use, or used and still use today, to try and understand those more complex conditions. And there have been massive studies run. In fact, the largest GWAS study to date had data from 5.4 million people in it. It was a study of height. You know, it's an easy trait to measure. So they ran a GWAS study, 5.4 million people. And it identified over 600 points in our genome that are contributing to the genetics of height. And of course, they combine with the environment as well to determine how high you are or how tall you are. But what was quickly learned from the genetics community was that the effect of any one of those 600 points was extremely low, right? And the hope from the genetics community was there'd be a big effect size so that we could go to the clinicians and go, oh, look, this, you know, you can act on this clinically, or it's a really good predictor. But it turns out they were really bad predictors. They were very, very poor effect sizes. So the trick that the genetics community came up with to try and increase the effect size or predictive ability was this concept that Sarah mentioned, polygenic risk scores. So put simply, if you take that one for height, you would take those 600 points plus many others. And for an individual, say for me, you determine, do I carry the letter at that one of 600 positions that means I'm going to be taller, or is it the letter for being a little bit smaller? And you add up all those 600 effect sizes to create a score for me and a score for everyone else. And that is a reasonable predictor of, say, height. It can explain about 40% of the variation in height in a population. I'm kind of been sticking with this point of height, but they've run GWAS studies for pretty much every human trait you can think about. Height, weight, intelligence, a variety of different diseases, and so on. Maybe bringing it back to the medical domain with breast cancer, some of you might be familiar with the concept of a BRCA mutation. So a BRCA mutation, it's not quite monogenic, but it confers very high degree of risk for breast cancer. So about 80% of people who carry a BRCA mutation will develop breast cancer by 80 years of age, right? So pretty high risk associated with it. If you do a polygenic risk score for breast cancer, and you're in the top 20% risk, right? There'll be a normal distribution for polygenic risk for breast cancer. If you're in the top 20%, about 20% of those individuals will develop breast cancer by 80 years of age. So the polygenic risk score explains a significant part of breast cancer risk, but it's not as strong as, say, a BRCA mutation. Sarah also mentioned the point about fair distribution. And one of the issues with polygenic risk scores is they are heavily biased and give most prediction value for people of European-like ancestry, right? And that leads to a potential inequality issue. If you have African-like ancestry or Asian-like ancestry, these predictive models don't perform as well. And just to give a little bit of context to that, you're probably asking, why is that the case? The reason is that genetics research, similar to most health research, over the last 20 to 30 years has been primarily funded by the National Institute for Health in the US, so US-based, a variety of different European governments, charities like the Wellcome Trust, which is based in the UK. So the biggest proportion of health research funding has been in countries with a very high proportion of European-like ancestry. So who are the individuals who are going into those cohort studies, the public participants? They tend to be of European-like ancestry because they're in those regions. They're not exclusively, but they've tended to be. So the genetic studies have been dominated by European-like ancestry. So our understanding of genetics is better in those ancestries, in particular for polygenic risk scores. I should say it's less of an issue when it comes to diagnostics, why someone has a disease. We have a better understanding and can make better predictive or interpretation of genetic variants in those settings. But again, the clinical geneticists in the audience might want to build on that. So really that's it for me. I just wanted to separate in our minds much needed investment in diagnostics. Why do I have this disease? Versus who might develop it in the future. I think there's, in my mind at least, and this is one for us to discuss, there are far more ethical issues and challenges with the latter relative to the former. And then the second point, this issue of underrepresentation of particular ancestries, that to address that, it requires, unfortunately, more investment. It requires participation and data sharing, the ability to access and share and analyze data on people of other ethnicities so we can balance our genetic understanding. So that's it. Thank you again for giving me the privilege of being part of this discussion.
Thanks, everybody. And thank you to our two speakers. Plenty of food for thought, I think it's fair to say. And what we do now is we open the discussion to the floor and we will take questions and answers. There is a microphone roving just to help. It's a nice room, but sometimes it can be hard to hear. So if you have any questions, can you please raise your hand? Helpful if you tell us who you are and if you have a professional affiliation. That would be useful to know as well.
I think you're absolutely right, and the risk and danger will be as exactly as you've described, a kind of reinforcing of existing inequalities, existing unequal power between who is engaged in developing genomic science and potential exploitative practices in relation to collecting and garnering data that is so essential for genomic research. So I think we have to be really, really mindful of that. So there's an issue in terms of exclusions from the data sets that are being used in the global north that will be therefore not useful for some of our own populations, but even more of a concern in terms of rolling out the benefits of genomic medicine in the global south, for example. On the other hand, there may be opportunities for other kinds of interventions that would be much more impactful on overall health as well.
I might just add very briefly to that from the context of understanding genetic variation, which is required to get that equity across different ancestries and regions of the globe, the genetics community recognized this as a major issue perhaps 10 years ago now, and there have been clear changes in strategy to address the point. trying to sequence and identify genetic variants in people of ancestries other than European-like. So there has been a conscious shift to do that.
Gianpiero will answer, but we were just talking about precisely that before we came downstairs. And then I'll go back to citizens' juries afterwards.
So the citizens' jury on genomics in Ireland has been published, the output, so I'd encourage people to read that. If you Google IPOSI citizens' jury genomics, you'll see the report. And yes, so AlphaFold, we were chatting about it in terms of diagnostics. Why do I have this disease? There's a program that's built from the information from AlphaFold called Alpha Missense that is now routinely used in genetic diagnostics. In my opinion, it's been an incremental step. It's certainly an excellent tool, probably the best for figuring out which change is causing disease from one that's not. But there were other tools present before it that did a pretty good job. So Alpha Missense is certainly a step up, but it's not like completely changed the landscape.
I'm just coming back to citizens' juries or citizens' assemblies. I mean, I did miss a few things out of my talk, and one is actually I think I mentioned the absolute importance of engaging publics, but to do it kind of continuously and iteratively. So citizens' juries or citizens' assemblies can help perhaps shape the development of something new, kind of give the kind of broad contours of that, but you would want to have that as a continued process of engagement, I think, as well. I think I'll hand over to the geneticist in a moment, but it's a really good question because it speaks to fundamentally what I was talking about, that you have a life to live. Medicine and healthcare has a role in supporting that quality of life. It actually also has a role of kind of creating some of the very problems that it then needs to provide other solutions to, and over-pathologizing aging is one of those things. So the Nuffield Council on Bioethics has done a big piece of work on aging that involved a lot of public engagement and deliberation, and whether sort of the technologies of medical science should be amplified, developed, and much of the findings were to consider the much broader social, familial, and socioeconomic context of aging as the first priority for those as they go through their life course. And a lesser priority is the development of some specific technologies, particularly genetic technologies, that might provide some pharmacological or other solution to aging.
So I would say the motivation of genetics, human genetics research, is to understand. It's not to create drugs or, you mentioned the bioeconomy, and I absolutely take your point, but certainly from an academic perspective, when it comes to aging or any disease, it's about understanding how and why we age. So through genetics, for example, we understand that the edges of our chromosomes, the ends, the telomeres, get shorter. You might have heard of that with Dolly the sheep. We know that we gather somatic mutations. So these are tissue-specific mutations as we age from the day we're born. We know that our DNA becomes chemically modified through methylation that influences why genes turn on and off, that those patterns change with age. So when I, as a geneticist, think of aging as a trait, it's about understanding aging and, are there elements that influence healthy aging? So are there certain genetic changes that predict better cognition, which you would consider as a healthy aging factor? So that's the lens through which I would see it, as opposed to what I understood from your question is, keeping people alive indefinitely where their quality of life is poor. Maybe I misinterpreted that. I would say yes, for sure. Like as a scientist, you come up with what's interesting to you, which often does not have the public voice in the room. You know, so even this exercise, you hear what's important to people who aren't geneticists, let's say. So I absolutely agree, Rasha. Like, I would frequently go, well, let's do X, but there may be reasons why doing X is not the appropriate thing to do. But
yeah, I'd say yes as well, of course, but it's kind of how as well, how we can do that through the science trajectory. So it's looking at how kind of social and ethical issues are embedded in the very way in which science operates. That does lead to certain types of questions being asked. So it's and how we can develop better ways of engaging with society, let's say, the citizenry, publics, and others in that process, that kind of process of discovery science, because very often we leave that form of engagement to when science is getting nearer to the point of application. And science is a political activity as well. It's dependent on funding. It's dependent on writing grant applications that make suggestions about potential impacts, even if those impacts might be 10, 20 years down the line. And I think there's a danger of trying to compress that trajectory in some ways, which means we can't be as considered as we should be about the social and ethical ramifications of what we do, which might be well beyond the specificity of a particular application, because developments can change the cultural milieu within which we operate, the social relationships that we have, and the health systems that we support. Yes, that's a good summary of, I think, what the situation as is and how it could develop. So the notion of the public good is used all the time. I mean, it's used. Public interest is used in legal context. It's a justification for using data as well, and it's in a sense a justification for the whole enterprise. But the public good, in my view, would be improvement in health across whole populations and different segments of those populations as well. That isn't the economic driver, I don't think, because I think that is more specific in terms of wealth creation, even though a wealthier population, if those resources are distributed evenly across populations, will be healthier populations. We don't ever see evidence of that trickle down working very well in most societies, and we still have massive inequality. Sorry, I'm rambling on a little bit, but I think this is really important because the political economy of these and other developments is really important to understand, and then who the key players are there, which sectors, which is why in our report on genomics, AI and genomics, it was looking at that kind of dependency that could be developed in that context, where a public healthcare system might have to use private partnerships in order to be able to develop and use these technologies, because there won't be internal capacity, and then there's a kind of lock-in as a result of that. So I think, again, it comes back to kind of open discussions, discourses, and transparent discussions about what these drivers are, and then engagement with publics about, well, is this what we want? And that can be an open question.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that when we talk about genomic diagnostics and prediction, it is not all reliant on AI. Like, up to this point, it's been largely AI free. So, you know, as an audience, we shouldn't walk away thinking genomics is all AI, and because AI is industry, which I agree with, that all of genomics and genomic-based health prediction is completely dependent on AI. It's not. Up to this point, it has been largely AI-free. And I frankly don't see that, and I might be wrong saying this, but I don't see that really changing in the short term. And AI will provide incremental steps, or has so far with genomics.
Thank you, it's great. So it's funny when you're doing a Q&A, I keep imagining there's hundreds of hands in the air. So it's just, I want to thank our two speakers, Professors Sarah Cunningham-Burley and Professor Gianpiero Cavalleri. This was, I think, the discussion. I hope that you can take heart from the way your talk was received, by the quality of the questions that we've had. And I would like to thank you, audience, for that as well. It's been fantastic. I have 3 observations. I'll abuse my position. I suppose that my takeaways are, first of all, don't be dazzled by the data, because we don't necessarily have to chase it, and even if we do chase it, it may not do what we want. Secondly, curb your curiosity if you're a scholar. We have a personal responsibility to do that, but also there may be curbs imposed on us. Being curious is it's not free rein anymore. We have to be ethically considered in what we do. And the third thing is have regard to all those things we cannot measure. This brings us into the sociological space. Some respects it can bring us into a legal space as well. I'm a lawyer by training. That we have to have regard to those things we cannot measure. And because ethics cannot always be measured, among other issues. So I'm really, thank you for those. I'll go away and think about that myself now. I want to remind you that this was the second in our discourse series. There's 6 discourses every year. And the next one is called From Algorithms to Political Polls, Is AI Redefining Democracy? And that will be on Tuesday, the 3rd of December at 6 p.m., just before your Christmas shopping gets going. The discourse is currently sold out, but a recording will be available on the website following the event. And sometimes, not everyone shows up, so you may get in on the day. You might also be interested to know that the Academy is hosting a 2-day policy workshop on AI and genomics this week. This has been co-organised by the Life and Health Science Multidisciplinary Committee with the UK Academy of Medical Sciences. It will convene stakeholders from Ireland and the UK to expand understanding of the current practices of implementing AI in genomic medicine and explore how this process should be governed and regulated. The report produced from the workshop aims to identify research gaps and priorities, ethical and regulatory concerns, and inform future policy on both sides of the Irish Sea. We encourage you all to watch out for its release. Won't be quite ready for Christmas, I suspect. It's great to see this collaboration between the 2 academies, and I'm delighted that some of our colleagues from the AMS were able to attend this evening's event as well. Small reminder to return to academic business. For the members of the Academy, if you haven't done so yet, don't forget to sign the attendance book at the back of the hall outside the library, a responsibility that only falls on members of the Academy. Thank you all for attending and for your wonderful questions and observations. And do join us now for refreshments, well earned, if I may say, in the front rooms. And the speakers' officers will now process out in advance of the audience, despite the camera. Okay, thank you very much.